So, it seems as though something has led you to the campsite of the Orator. Well, as you can see, I have stoked the fire, which means it's time for you to pull up your chair and settle in, because I have another tale to tell. When a life lives and ends violently, and their spirit is tethered to the earth, it can manifest in odd ways. Sometimes these are loops or echoes of the spirit's life. You can hear voices or sounds. You can see objects move around. But beware the next time you're around an angry spirit. Beware as you watch the light reflect off a pane of glass, because you just might see a manifestation of the spirit themselves. But before we begin, if you found yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your plant chat to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, of course, all of my stories are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. Today's story comes from us from Redditor Crazy Turtle Mama, and I will make sure to link her original story below. But if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, just reach out to me on any of my social media and we'll find a time to get together, collect your story, and potentially one day feature it here on the Orator. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's tale. It is a story that I call Faces in the Glass. The year's 1987. Brandy is 19 years old, and she lives in Hacienda Heights, California. She recently started dating this guy named David, and the relationship has progressed enough that the two of them are thinking of moving in together. The problem is, Brandy still lives at home with her mom. And when she talks to her mom about David potentially moving in and the seriousness of their relationship, her mom kind of cautions her. She says, I don't know what it is about David, but there's just something off about him, and I think it's a bad relationship. It's going to end badly, and because of that, I don't think that we should invite him into our home permanently. And so they have this really big argument, and it ends up going so badly that Brandy moves out of her mom's house, and her and David find a house a little bit down the street, and they move in together. And the house they find, it's this one bedroom, one bathroom little bungalow. And it's pretty quaint, but it's something that's in their budget and they can afford. And so as you enter the house, it's pretty straightforward. It's one big living room. On the left-hand side, as soon as you enter, there's a really nice fireplace, and then it's sort of bookended by these two bookshelves on either side of it. And then on the right-hand side, you have the bathroom and the bedroom. And then if you go further back into the house, there's the dining room and then the kitchen, and then the kitchen has a back door out to the backyard, and that's pretty much it. Very straightforward design. And so they move in, and right away, as soon as they move into the house, there are some oddities that Brandy notices. The first one is that she's really kind of a Susie homemaker. She really likes to spruce things up and make a house feel like a home. And as soon as she moves into this place, that's what she thinks she's going to do. She's like, even though this place isn't exactly what we want, I can paint the walls and buy the different types of furniture, and I can really make this house ours. But when she moves in, it's like all of a sudden that spirit, that energy dies. She just doesn't feel like she wants to do that anymore. And it's just this really weird feeling because they just moved out together. She should be really excited about this new adventure in her life, and really she is. But when she's in this house, it's like she just doesn't have that energy or spirit. No room in this house feels great, but no room in this house is worse than the bedroom. It's like this is where this darkness in this house, this weirdness in this house seems to be concentrated. It's like she doesn't really want to do a ton while she's in the house, but when she's in the bedroom specifically, it's like she's actually depressed just to be in there, just to exist in that room. And it's a very odd feeling because when Brandy's out and about and she's outside of this house, she doesn't feel any of that. It's not like it's a seasonal depression or she's worrying about her relationship with her mom. It's like it's specifically tied to this house and even more specifically to this room. And because of this sort of negativity happening in the house, you know, Brandy and David, it seems like they're fighting more and more. And it seems almost like the house is feeding off this negative energy, because if they're out and about and they have a little bit of an argument, it's just that. It just is quick, it ends, they resolve it. But if they're in this house, it's like they have these knock-down, drag-out fights that are really, really bad, and it seems to be getting worse and worse. And it seems like every single time this happens, or maybe not every time, but most of the time, David will get so angry that he'll literally pack things up and he'll leave for a few days. And Brandy said, she thinks part of this is just he wanted distance and to get away, and they have this huge fight. But she's convinced, even after all these years later, that part of the reason David did this was because he knew that this house was dark and that it was scary, and he knew it would be scary for Brandy to be alone in this house because of the weirdness and the negativity. So he would leave and leave her alone knowing this place was really dark. And so it's just one of those nights. They had a fight, and David has left. He's been gone for a couple days, and it's actually the middle of the night. Brandy is asleep, and all of a sudden she's woken up by this giant bang! And this bang is so loud. It's not like something fell off the counter or anything like that. It was so loud it made her ears ring. It sounded like a gunshot. Or, she gets up and she looks out the window and she's wondering, did someone throw a firecracker or did a car go off? But she opens up the window and she's looking out into the street, and it's like, it's totally empty and quiet. There's no movement. Nobody's awake right now. It's like this did not happen outside. This is something that happened in her home, and it was so loud and her ears are still ringing. And so she looks around. She can't find a source for any of it. And so at some point, she's just left to go back to sleep. And so she wakes up the next morning. She goes throughout the rest of the day. And then that night, once again, she goes to sleep. And again, middle of the night, and this time, it seems even louder than the night before. It wakes her completely, and this time she looks at her clock, and it is, to the second, exactly 5 o'clock in the morning. And she's thinking back to yesterday, and she's like, I think this happened at literally the exact same time. So at the same time, 5 a.m., there's this loud bang, so loud, it makes her ears ring. And there's no source for it at all. It's the exact same thing as the night before. And then as she's kind of getting up and looking around and wondering where this source of noise came from, the temperature in her bedroom plummets. It goes from being totally normal, good sleeping temperature to freezing. And she's like, it just comes out of nowhere. Her window, it's not like, she lives in California. It's not freezing cold out or anything like that. And so she gets back in her bed and she's laying down. And as she's laying down and trying to get back to sleep and ignoring this freezing cold, she can hear what sounds like someone crying, like really loud, like wailing kind of crying. And she has her ear to her pillow, and so she's thinking, sometimes, with the fan and the noises outside and stuff like that, there can be almost like this trick where it sounds like something, and then when you lift your head off the pillow, you don't hear it anymore. So she lifts her head up and she's listening, and sure enough, it's like off in the distance, but she hears this woman wailing, and it sounds sort of echoey and ethereal, and she can't locate a source for it at all. And so, this is out of the ordinary, obviously, but there's so much weird negativity in this house, and it's so dark, and there's so much weirdness coming from it that she just, at some point, goes back to sleep, even though something supernatural is clearly happening. And she wakes up the next morning, and at some point that day, David comes home. He's got flowers. He apologizes, and even though it's not a great relationship, they do make up with each other. And this is the kind of stuff that just happened in the household. They would see all sorts of very strange stuff. A different night is, only a couple weeks later, they're just finishing dinner. They sit down on the couch. They're going to kind of settle in for a movie. And then all of a sudden, Brandy needs to use the restroom. So she gets up, she goes to the bathroom. And while she's in the bathroom, she can hear out in the living room David saying something. And she can't hear him because there's the noise of the TV and she's got the fan on in the bathroom. And then as she's listening, it's like he's getting louder and louder, almost to the point where he's yelling. But she still can't understand exactly what it is that he's saying. And so she finishes up and she opens up the bathroom door, steps out of the living room. She's like, what? And he looks at her, and as soon as he looks at her, he turns like white as a sheet and he crawls backwards on the couch in fear. And he's just looking at her. And then he looks at the kitchen, and he looks back at her. he looks at the kitchen, he looks back at her, and then all of a sudden, without an explanation, he gets up, he runs into the kitchen, he searches around this tiny kitchen for a minute, and then he goes to the back door. And he's checking the back door, and it's got 2 different locks on it. The actual door itself is locked with one of those bolt locks, but then after the bolt lock, it's got a chain lock, and that chain lock is on. And so he's looking at this door, and he just keeps saying to himself, it's locked from the inside. It's locked from the inside. And Brandy, she's like, what is going on? And he looks at her and he says, Brandy, just a minute ago, you were standing in the kitchen. And I was like, what are you doing in there? And he said, you were wearing this like old woman's sort of nightgown, it looked like. And I said, what are you doing wearing that old woman's nightgown? And he said, and I kept talking to you and you were just ignoring me. And it was getting me really angry that I could just be speaking to you and you acted like I wasn't. And so I asked, would you make me a snack? And he's like, I just kept trying to talk and you wouldn't say anything. And then all of a sudden you came out of the bathroom, and then I looked over and there's nobody in the kitchen. And so they're talking about this for a minute and they're looking around and there's just nobody in the house. And David's like, I was sitting in the living room, the kitchen's right there, well lit. I didn't mistake it. Somebody was in our kitchen, but there's nowhere else to go. You can walk into the living room or you can go out the back door. And remember, the back door's locked from the inside. And so, they don't have an explanation. And so they continue to live at this house for several more months, and things continue to happen that are really weird. Every once in a while, on like a loop, they'll hear somebody banging on the bathroom door. Now remember, the bathroom door is right there in front of them. They can see it at all times. They hear somebody banging really hard, and then they hear a loud guy's voice say, oh, come on! Like he wants to get into the bathroom, and he's really frustrated that he can't get in there. Another thing that they see on a loop that happens pretty consistently is every once in a while they're sitting there on their couch, they'll see a kid sitting on their stoop. Now this kid, he looks like he's maybe like a teenager, 13, 14 years old, and he's sitting right on their front stoop. And so when they go over and open the door to talk to this kid and see what's going on, he's just gone. And there's nobody anywhere up and down the street or around the house or anything like that. It's like he literally disappears. But when they see him, they get a pretty good look. Like I said, 13, 14, he's a boy, he's got long dark hair, and he keeps putting his head in his hands almost like he's crying or really upset about something. And then the other thing that starts to manifest is, when you first walk into their little bungalow, on the left-hand side, there's that fireplace, and then there's the 2 bookshelves. And whenever they watch TV, there's the light that casts off of the television, it sort of reflects against these bookshelves, and it makes, of course, weird patterns how the light sort of bounce off of the window panes. And when they had first moved in, not long after having moved in, Brandy could have sworn that on these panes of glass, she could sort of see like these weird ethereal faces. And when they first moved in, she mentioned it to David, and he would look at it for a while. He's like, you're crazy. There's nothing there. But as time went on, and the longer they lived in the house, it's like these faces became less and less abstract and more concrete. And it got to the point where it couldn't be denied anymore. It wasn't a trick of the light. There were faces on there. And she could see them, and eventually David could start to see them. And so they have these weird loops. There's the faces on the glass. There's the kid outside. There's the banging on the bathroom door. There's these weird episodes of these loud bangs. And all of this stuff is culminating. At some point, Brandy has to call the landlord. And so she calls this guy, and she's like trying to figure out, did something happen here? In the past, did the previous owners die here in a violent way? Like, she's trying to unearth the history of what's going on here. So she calls the landlord, and as soon as he picks up and she starts to talk, he says, are you trying to call me to complain about something that's happened in the house that I can't fix and don't have anything to do with? And the way he says it makes Brandy believe that he already knew something was going on in the house. And then in the background, he hears this guy's wife, and she says, oh, is that the young couple on X and X Road? Oh, great. Looks like we lost another one. And so she's like, what the heck is this? And so she tries to talk to him for a minute. He's extremely elusive about the entire thing. And at some point, she just decides, I'm not going to get anything out of this guy. And she just hangs up. And so that's it. For the next couple of months, they just sort of endure this. But the entire time, Their relationship is eroding. Things are getting worse and worse. David is starting to turn to drinking, and he's starting to do it on like a consistent basis. And then there's one night where he's out drinking. He calls Brandy to come get him. She goes out to the bar to get him. There's this really serious altercation because he wants to drive and she won't let him because he's drunk. And unfortunately, there's physical violence, and he breaks her arm in the altercation. And so she drives herself to the hospital with him there because he's still drunk. And they, obviously end up splinting her arm. They put it in a cast, and then they just go home. And this is unfortunately Brandy's life. This guy, she shouldn't stay with him. She knows better, but she's doing it anyway, unfortunately. And he's just this horrible guy that's abusive and mean. And so as soon as they get home, she goes into the bedroom, and she's just like, I just want to be alone. I want to go to sleep. I'm in pain. It's late. And he's in the living room, and he's just getting angrier and angrier at the whole situation, mostly because he knows that what he did was wrong, and he's trying to blame her because that's the type of person he is. And so at some point, he gets so mad, he comes into the bedroom, and he starts to pack his stuff. And so he leaves, and at some point, she comes out of the bedroom, and she's just trying to sit down and watch TV and forget about this whole night. And outside, a storm starts. And it starts to at first, she said it was just like a light, warm rain, but then it started to get more and more intense. And at some point, it got so bad, it knocked the power out in their house. And so now David's gone. She's in this terrifying house, and there's no electricity. And so she goes and she gets a bunch of candles, and she lights all these candles, and she sets it up around the living room just so she can have light because she's truly scared. I mean, this is a really dark, evil place. David's gone. She has a broken arm. She's in this terrible place. And so she's just sitting there thinking about her life and what's gone wrong. And she wants to talk to her mom, but she knows she's screwed things up. And as she's sitting there, she's just sort of staring off. And she just happens to be staring at the panes of glass on these bookshelves that sort of are on opposite sides of the fireplace. And as she's watching them, she's seeing the candlelight play off of the glass. And these faces that she's been seeing for months start to manifest. And instead of these weird sort of ethereal outlines of faces, these faces come into stark clarity for her. She sees 3 very distinct faces on each pane of glass. The first face is an old lady. She's got her hair pulled back. It's gray. She's got a headband on to keep her hair back. And she is an angry old lady. She's screaming. She's wagging her finger. And Brandy said the image of this lady was so clear. The light from the candles, she could see it bouncing off the spittle on this lady's lips and her teeth. Her teeth were literally glistening in the light as she's screaming about something. Now, Brandy said she couldn't hear anything, but she could see this woman screaming and wagging her finger. The second pane of glass had this middle-aged man, maybe 30, 40 years old, and he just looked really upset, angry. And she said he didn't seem like he was upset necessarily at her. He just seemed like he was one of those types of guys that hated everyone and everything, and he was just a miserable, mean guy. And so he's just standing there looking angry. And then the third pane of glass, it has this young boy, maybe a teenager, and he's just sitting there, and he's got long, dark hair. And then at some point, this kid takes his head and he puts it in his hands. And when he does that, Brandy realizes it's the same kid they've been seeing on this stoop outside who's been disappearing. That's the kid she's seeing in this pane of glass. And she said for hours, she just sat there as these candles slowly died. And she watched these faces for hours as they came into starker and starker contrast. And then eventually, the lights came back on. And Brandy finally had the courage to go to sleep. And so she goes to bed, she gets a couple hours sleep, and then the next morning she wakes up, she goes to the corner store, she calls her mom on the phone, and she just says, Mom, I made a mistake. I can't do this anymore. I'm done with David. Please come get me, and let's take care of this. And so she does. Her mom comes, they clean up all of their stuff, and then she is going to hand over the key to the landlord and take her daughter home. And so she does. They pack everything up. She hands the key to the landlord. Her daughter's in the car. And then her mom sits out there and has this long conversation with the landlord. And Brandy doesn't know what's going on because she's sitting in the car. She doesn't want to get involved. She just wants to leave. And so after a little while, her mom, she comes, she sits down in the car. They start it up. They head back down the street to their house, park. They get out. They go inside. And once they're sitting in the house, her mom says, I have to tell you what I talked to the landlord about. She said, I asked about the history of that house. And she said, here's what he told me. He said that when he bought it, he was, originally it was a 2-bungalow set, but when he bought it, one of them had burned down. And so now he only bought one of them. So this other property that was next to it was burned to the ground, and they had never rebuilt anything. But the one that they lived in, it had an older lady that lived there, and apparently her son lost his job and was an alcoholic and was just one of these down on his luck kind of people. He moved in with his son. So now it's the grandma, her son, and her grandson, who was like a teenager. And of course, she was just this mean old lady. He was this miserable drunk. And so this kid, he didn't really have a chance. And so at some point, this kid found a gun in the house. And unfortunately, he shot himself and killed himself. And then apparently not long after that, the old lady died from a heart attack, like pretty quickly after. And then they ended up getting rid of the house. Nobody knows even what happened to the dad. He was just disappeared, apparently. Nobody has any recollection of what happened to him. And so the guy said when he bought this house, he didn't know about the history of the house. He bought it to be able to rent it out. And then as he started renting it out, it's like nobody could last more than a couple of months. And so he dug into the history of the house, and this is what he found. And so now Brandy's seeing everything in a new light. Those 3 panes of glass, the 3 people who live there, the man banging on the door, screaming to get in. That's the middle-aged man who's a depressed alcoholic. And then, of course, there's the little boy who she kept seeing sitting, depressed, on their stoop. And she heard the gunshot going off at 5 a.m. And so here we are 16 years later. Brandy says she's experienced a whole mess of other supernatural phenomenon. But even now as an adult, she can't help but look back at this time in her life where she was in this house with these spirits who were begging so hard to be understood that they manifested in panes of glass. And so that's going to do it for today's story. If you found yourself enjoying this or any of the stories on my channel, first-hand true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, of course, all of my stories are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, just reach out to me on any of my social media and we will find a time to get together, collect your story, and potentially feature it one day here on the Orator. And so until next time, where you'll see that the fire is stoked, you may pull up your chair and settle in, and I will have another tale to tell.